My name is Olivia Parker. I'm 29 years old and I work in IT support for a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus. My life is not dramatic. Most weeks follow the same rhythm: office during the day, gym after work, groceries on Sunday afternoon, laundry while some random show plays in the background. I like routine because routine is predictable. When something breaks, I fix it. When something feels messy, I write it down and solve it step by step. People, unfortunately, don't always follow that system. For the last 2 years, most of my routine has included Caleb Ward. Caleb is 27, confident in the kind of way that fills a room the moment he walks in. Loud, blunt, competitive about almost everything. If there were a scoreboard for life, Caleb would want to win it. When we first started dating, I thought that energy was exciting. Later, I realized it was also exhausting. But relationships are complicated like that. You don't notice the small imbalances at first. You adjust to them. A sharper joke here, a slightly dismissive comment there. Nothing that seems serious enough to question the entire relationship. We didn't live together officially, but Caleb spent most nights at my apartment anyway. His gym bag lived next to my couch. Half the fridge was usually filled with his protein shakes and energy drinks. When we traveled, we split costs. When we cooked, we shared groceries. From the outside, it looked like we were already building a life together. And in my head, we were. That's why I had been planning to propose this spring. Not something flashy. Just a small get-together at a brewery near the Riverwalk we both liked. A handful of friends. My younger sister. His best friend, Sophie. Nothing dramatic. After drinks, I would ask him to step outside by the water. And I would ask the question. I know some people still think proposals are supposed to come from men, but that never bothered me. Caleb and I had talked about marriage more than once. Every time, he said he wasn't against it. He just wanted the moment to be memorable. That word had come up several times. Memorable. At first, I imagined quiet and meaningful, but Caleb kept hinting he wanted an audience. Come on, he said once while scrolling through his phone beside me on the couch. If it's a proposal, people should see it. I laughed. I thought you hated attention. Not when it's a good story, he said with a grin. So I compromised. I booked the brewery space for next month, talked to Sophie about getting the usual group there, even asked Caleb what kind of ring he liked. He sent me 3 links like he was assigning me a project at work. Typical Caleb. Everything felt normal. Until last week. My manager let our team leave early after we finished a system rollout ahead of schedule. I drove home around 3 in the afternoon, which almost never happens. Caleb's car was already parked outside my building. That wasn't unusual. His gym was nearby, and he often stopped by before evening classes. When I opened my apartment door, I heard voices from the kitchen. Caleb and Sophie. I assumed they were just hanging out. So I came in quietly the way I usually do when someone's on the phone. The kitchen is visible from the hallway if you stand at the right angle. Caleb had his back to me, leaning against the counter in gym clothes, drinking from my water bottle like it belonged to him. Sophie was facing the hallway. She saw me first. Her eyes widened. For a split second, she froze completely. Caleb didn't notice. He was talking fast, energized, like someone explaining a plan he was proud of. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. Watch me say no and make her cry. The sentence landed in the air like it belonged to someone else. Sophie let out a nervous laugh. The kind people make when they're not sure whether something is supposed to be funny. Caleb kept going. She's totally going to do it, he said. Olivia thinks she's being subtle, but I saw the brewery reservation email. My heartbeat slowed in that strange way it does when shock kicks in. She's planning the whole romantic speech thing, he continued. Everyone will be there. Sophie glanced toward the hallway again. She definitely knew I was standing there, but Caleb was too caught up in his story to notice. I'm telling you, he said, grinning. When she gets down on one knee and I say no, the whole room is going to lose it. Sophie shifted uncomfortably. Caleb, that sounds kind of harsh. He waved a hand dismissively. It'll be iconic. Like he was planning a prank video. She needs to learn not to rush people into marriage, he added. And honestly, it'll make a great story. Then he said something else. Something smaller, but somehow worse. I'm even inviting Aaron from the gym. He'll think it's hilarious. Aaron, one of the louder guys from Caleb's gym circle. The type who treated everything like a spectacle if there was an audience. I stood there long enough to hear my own proposal described like a comedy routine. Then I stepped quietly back into the hallway. Neither of them saw me leave. I walked out of my apartment, down the stairs, and into the parking lot. My car still felt warm from the drive. I sat there for about 15 minutes without starting the engine. Not crying, not yelling, just thinking. Because my brain does this thing when something unbelievable happens. It tries to rebuild the timeline piece by piece until everything makes sense. So I replayed the words. Watch me say no and make her cry. Not I might say no. Not I'm not ready. It was a performance. And the part that stayed with me most was how excited he sounded. Like he was organizing entertainment. When I finally went back upstairs, I made sure my keys rattled loudly in the door. Sophie came out of the kitchen first. She wouldn't look me in the eye. Caleb followed behind her a second later, smiling like nothing in the world had changed. Hey, he said, kissing my cheek. Why are you home early? Manager let us go after the rollout, I said. My voice sounded normal, which surprised even me. Sophie grabbed her bag quickly. I should probably head out. The door closed behind her a few seconds later. Caleb stretched his arms over his head and leaned against the counter. So, he said casually, we still doing that brewery thing next month? I looked at him, really looked at him, at the relaxed posture, the confident grin, the man who had just described humiliating me in front of a room full of people. Yeah, I said, unless something's changed. He smirked. Nothing's changed. Then he added the sentence that confirmed everything. I just want to make sure you're planning something special. Special. The words sounded very different now. That night, Caleb fell asleep almost immediately. I stayed awake in the dark beside him, running through the facts. First, he clearly believed I was going to propose. Second, he knew the location and approximate timing. Third, he had already started inviting people to watch the moment, including Aaron, which meant the only real question left was simple. Would I walk into the trap he built for me, or would I rewrite the script before he realized it had changed? The next morning, I woke up before Caleb did. That wasn't unusual. I've always been the first one up. I made coffee quietly and stood in my kitchen in bare feet, watching the steam rise from the mug like it might settle something inside me. It didn't. The apartment looked the same as it always had. My laptop on the dining table, his sweatshirt over the back of a chair, the dish towel folded beside the sink. Ordinary things. That was the unsettling part. Nothing around me looked broken yet. But something had shifted so completely the day before that I could feel it in every surface. The kitchen no longer felt like the place where we cooked together. It felt like the place where I had overheard myself becoming the punchline to a story my boyfriend was excited to tell. Caleb walked in a few minutes later, still half asleep, hair messy, voice rough. Morning. Morning. He opened the fridge, grabbed one of his bottled shakes, and leaned against the counter like this was any normal Thursday. How's your schedule looking next month? I asked, keeping my tone light. He twisted the bottle cap off. Why? I might need to move the brewery reservation, I said. There's a chance work will dump another rollout on me that weekend. The reaction was immediate. Too immediate. He straightened a little. What? Why would you move it? I took a sip of coffee. I just said, work might get in the way. No, keep that weekend, he said quickly. You already planned it. Don't make it complicated. The words came out with a firmness that would have sounded normal to anyone else. But once you know someone is hiding something, normal starts sounding rehearsed. I looked at him over the rim of my mug. You seem invested. He gave a short laugh. I'm not invested. I just think if you already set it up, why change it? There it was, the pivot. Fast enough to sound casual, not fast enough to sound convincing. I nodded once like I accepted it. But internally, something cold and precise clicked into place. He needed that exact date, because he had already built something around it. I left for work an hour later, but I wasn't thinking about tickets or user permissions or the help desk queue. I was replaying every detail from the day before until they stopped looking like suspicions and started looking like structure. By lunch, I knew I needed confirmation. Not because I doubted what I heard, because I knew Caleb. If I confronted him too early, he would laugh, deflect, and call me dramatic. He would say I misunderstood. He would turn a deliberate act into a misunderstanding and make me work to prove my own memory. I wasn't going to do that. So that afternoon, after work, I started with the simplest thing, the brewery reservation. When I got home, Caleb was at the gym, which gave me exactly the kind of quiet I needed. I opened my laptop and logged into the booking portal. The confirmation email was still there, flagged in red from earlier in the week. I hadn't opened it since the day I reserved the room. But someone had. The timestamp showed it had been accessed while I was at work. I sat very still for a second, not because I was surprised, because proof has a different weight than instinct. Caleb knew my laptop password. I'd never hidden it because I never thought I needed to. In a normal relationship, that kind of access feels like trust. In the wrong relationship, it becomes convenience. I clicked through the reservation details slowly. Date, time, room setup, everything exactly as I remembered. Enough information for someone to build a scene around. I closed the tab and leaned back in my chair. So now I had the first piece. He had seen the confirmation. He knew where and when. He wasn't guessing. That night, Caleb came back from the gym in a good mood. too good. He kissed the top of my head while I was answering emails on my phone, then dropped into the chair across from me like he owned the room. "You seem quiet," he said. "Long day." He smirked. "You nervous about your big romantic surprise?" He said it teasingly, but his eyes stayed on me a beat too long. "Testing. Looking for cracks." I forced a small smile. I'm mostly focused on logistics. That answer disappointed him. I could see it. Just a flicker. He wanted nerves. He wanted anticipation. Probably because it made the scene in his head more entertaining. Later that evening, while he showered, I texted Sophie. I kept it simple. Me. "Hey, random question. Who all did Caleb say should be at the brewery thing? I just want to make sure I don't leave out anyone important." She didn't answer immediately. That hesitation said plenty on its own. When the typing bubble finally appeared, it vanished once, then came back. Sophie. Mostly the usual people. Sophie. Me, Jordan, Ava, your sister maybe? Sophie. And Aaron, LOL. Sophie. Caleb said it would be iconic. Iconic. There was that word again. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. A week ago, iconic would have sounded like enthusiasm. Now it sounded like cruelty dressed up as humor. I typed back. Me. Got it. Thanks. She sent a thumbs up. Nothing else. No apology, no warning, no explanation. I wasn't angry at Sophie. Not exactly. She looked uncomfortable the day before. She knew it was wrong. But discomfort is not the same thing as integrity, and I was beginning to understand how many people stay silent if the room is socially convenient enough. A few days later, Caleb left his phone face up on my coffee table while he ran downstairs to bring up a food delivery. Normally, I would never touch it. Even after what I heard, I still had that reflexive hesitation. But I didn't need to search. His lock screen lit up with a preview banner from Aaron. Aaron, LMAO, I'm not missing this. My body went still. The message sat there in bright white text against the black screen for 3 full seconds before it faded. When Caleb came back inside, balancing takeout containers, and talking about how the driver almost left with the wrong order, I looked at him and realized something with total clarity. He wasn't conflicted. He was excited. The next day, I got another confirmation without even trying. We were in my car after the gym, parked outside his place while he finished telling me some story about a guy in one of his lifting classes who tried to outdo everyone for attention. Caleb laughed, shook his head, and said, "Men are ridiculous when there's an audience." I almost laughed at the irony. Then, casually, like he was commenting on the weather, he added, "Honestly, even Trish would laugh at something like that." I glanced at him. "Trish?" "My ex," he said. "She used to love messy public drama." He smiled to himself like it was a fond memory. That bothered me more than I expected. Not because of jealousy. I didn't care about Trish in any romantic sense. She was part of his past. But the way he brought her up told me something important. Public humiliation wasn't some line he had stumbled toward by accident. It was a language he already understood. A form of entertainment he had seen before, maybe even admired. "You think it's funny?" I asked. He shrugged. "Depends who deserves it." That sentence stayed with me the whole drive home. Depends who deserves it. As if dignity was conditional, as if humiliation was a tool you earned the right to use when someone made themselves vulnerable in front of you. That night, I lay awake while Caleb slept beside me, one arm thrown across my waist like affection, and possession had somehow become the same thing. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the smaller moments I had smoothed over during the relationship, the jokes at my expense in front of his friends, the way he would needle me, then call me sensitive if I reacted. How every disagreement somehow became less about what happened and more about whether I was making it a thing. None of those moments had felt big enough on their own. That was the trick. Patterns rarely announce themselves as patterns when you're still inside them. By Friday, I had stopped asking myself whether I was overreacting. I wasn't. I was being set up. And once that truth settled fully into my body, the question changed. This was no longer about whether I still wanted to propose. That answer was obvious. The real question was what to do with the truth. A private breakup would be cleaner, easier, less exhausting. That was my natural instinct. I like quiet exits. I like shutting doors and moving on. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that a private exit would leave him room to rewrite the story. He would tell people I got cold feet, that I misread a joke, that I was dramatic or too intense about marriage. And the people he had invited would never know they were being gathered not for a celebration, but for a spectacle. No, if Caleb wanted an audience, then the audience deserved the truth. I didn't need revenge. I needed the facts to stand where everyone could see them. So I made myself one promise. I would not humiliate him with lies. I would only use what he had already chosen to reveal, Once I had that principle, the rest began to take shape. I opened a blank note on my phone and started listing everything I knew. The email, Sophie's text, Aaron's message preview, Caleb's comments, his insistence on keeping the date. Each detail neat and factual, stripped of drama. The way I document recurring failures at work before escalating them. Only this time the failure was my relationship. And by the time I finished writing it all down, I understood something with a calm that almost scared me. He thought I was walking blindly toward the night that would humiliate me. What he didn't know yet was that I had already decided something final. If there was going to be a performance at that brewery, it would not end with me in tears. It would end with the truth standing in the middle of the room. Once the decision settled in my mind, something inside me went quiet. Not calm exactly. More like the moment when a storm stops building and starts moving in a clear direction. I didn't cancel the brewery reservation. That would have been the obvious move, and obvious moves are easy to rewrite later. Caleb could have turned that into a story about how I got nervous or changed my mind. No, the date stayed exactly where it was. If he wanted that night so badly, then we were going to have it. Just not the way he expected. The following Monday after work, I drove to the brewery. The place sat along the Riverwalk, the same way it always had. Brick walls, warm lighting. The low hum of conversations layered under music that was never quite loud enough to interrupt anything. The manager recognized me immediately. "Hey, Olivia," he said from behind the bar. "You here to check the room again?" "Actually," I said, "I had a small request." He led me to the side room I had originally reserved. It was a smaller space off the main patio. Cozy. A handful of tables, exposed wood beams, and a large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. The kind of space meant for birthday gatherings or engagement announcements, which technically it still was. I was wondering if I could connect my laptop to that screen for a few minutes during the event, I said. For a slideshow or something? Something like that. He shrugged easily. As long as it's appropriate. It will be. That part at least was true. I spent 10 minutes testing the connection. Laptop to HDMI. Input switch on the remote. Screen lit up instantly. The manager showed me how to flip between the normal feed and the laptop input quickly. "Just hit this button," he said, pointing at the remote. "It'll switch over." Perfect. I thanked him, closed my computer, and walked out into the late afternoon light by the river. Then I went home and started building the presentation. I didn't overthink it. No dramatic music, no long speech, just a sequence of simple slides. The first one was the reservation confirmation. Date, time, location. Proof that the evening had been planned weeks earlier because I thought it was going to mark the beginning of something permanent. The second slide showed the email activity log, opened from my laptop while I was at work. Not an accusation, just a fact. The third slide was the screenshot from Caleb's message to Aaron. "You better not miss this. It's going to be hilarious." I stared at that message for a long time before adding it, not because I doubted whether it belonged there, because seeing it in isolation made it impossible to pretend the tone was harmless. The fourth slide was simpler. Just a short audio icon. The recording I made 2 days earlier when Caleb was sitting on the couch next to me, scrolling through his phone and laughing at some viral video. "Imagine someone proposing in front of everyone," he said casually, "and the other person just says no. That would be brutal, but kind of amazing." He had no idea my phone was recording from the coffee table. I saved the clip and attached it to the slide. Then I added one final screen. Black background, white text, one sentence. After that, the technical part was done. The next step was practical. The ring. I had purchased it from a small jeweler downtown about 2 weeks earlier. Nothing extravagant. A simple band Caleb had pointed out once when we were walking past the display window. "I like that one," he had said casually. So I went back and bought it the following week. At the time, it felt like momentum. Now it felt like something that belonged to a different timeline. I drove to the shop the next afternoon during lunch. The same woman who had helped me before was behind the counter. "Hi again," she said warmly. I placed the small box on the glass surface between us. "I need to return this." She glanced at the receipt. "You're still within the 30-day window," she said gently. "Has it been resized yet?" "No." She nodded and began the paperwork without asking questions. Some people understand when silence is the most respectful option. 10 minutes later, the refund was processed. I walked out of the store with empty hands. Strangely, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like correction. That evening, Caleb was in an unusually good mood. He came over carrying takeout and a new gym hoodie he had apparently bought after his workout. "You like it?" he asked, pulling the fabric out so I could see the logo. "It's nice." He dropped onto the couch beside me, full of restless energy. "Next weekend's going to be fun," he said. The way he said it made the word fun sound electric. "What are you most excited about?" I asked. He grinned, just everyone being together. A pause. And the surprise. I nodded slowly. Yes, the surprise. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Caleb kept making little comments about the event. Not direct questions. Just hints. You nervous? You've been weirdly calm lately. I hope you didn't overplan everything. Every time he probed, I answered the same way. I'm focused on logistics. That response seemed to frustrate him slightly. He wanted emotion. He wanted tension. Probably because tension makes a better story. 2 days before the brewery night, I went back to the venue one more time with my laptop to confirm the connection still worked. It did. Slide by slide. Everything appeared exactly the way I needed it to. The manager gave me a thumbs up when I finished testing. Looks good. Thanks. As I packed up, I felt something settle deeper inside me. Clarity. Caleb had spent days imagining how the night would unfold. He probably pictured the moment vividly. Me standing there in front of everyone. Heart pounding. Voice shaking. Dropping to one knee. And then him saying no. Maybe he imagined laughter. Shock. Phones recording the moment. A story he could retell later with that same excited grin he used in the kitchen. The difference was simple. He thought I was the one walking into a trap. He thought the script belonged to him. What he didn't realize yet was that the script had already changed. The day of the event arrived faster than I expected. Caleb texted me that afternoon saying he would ride to the brewery with Sophie so the surprise would feel more authentic. That confirmed everything. He wanted to watch me walk into the room alone. I replied with a simple thumbs up. Then I packed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and left for the brewery. I arrived about 20 minutes early. The staff was already setting up the tables in the side room. I connected my laptop to the screen and minimized the presentation so it wouldn't be visible yet. Everything was ready. Guests began arriving slowly. A few friends hugged me and said they were excited. They looked genuinely happy, like people expecting a celebration, not cruelty. That mattered. It meant most of them had not been told the real plan. About 10 minutes later, Aaron walked in. He spotted me immediately and waved with a grin that felt slightly too eager. Big night, he said. You could say that. He ordered a drink and then leaned against the bar, glancing around the room like he was waiting for a show to start. Then the door opened again. Caleb walked in behind Sophie, laughing loudly at something before he even reached the table. When he saw me, he stepped forward, kissed my cheek, and whispered in my ear, "Don't chicken out." For the first time all week, I smiled without effort. "I won't," I said. And for the first time since I overheard his plan in my kitchen, that statement was completely true. Once everyone had drinks and settled into loose groups around the tables, I stood up from my chair. "Hey," I said, raising my voice just enough to gather attention. The room gradually quieted. Several people turned toward me with curious smiles. A couple of phones were already out, pointed casually in my direction. Caleb leaned back slightly in his chair, watching me with a look somewhere between anticipation and amusement. He thought he knew what was about to happen. I took a slow breath. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said. "I really appreciate everyone taking time out of their Saturday." Someone cheered lightly from the back. A few people clinked glasses. The mood in the room was warm, relaxed, expectant. Exactly the way I had originally imagined it. Instead of moving toward the center of the room like someone preparing to kneel, I turned toward the wall where the television screen hung above the bar. "I just want to show something first," I said. There was some confused laughter. Someone said, "Is this a slideshow?" Caleb's eyebrows pulled together slightly. Not alarmed. Just curious. I walked over to the TV, opened my laptop, and pressed one button on the remote the manager had shown me earlier. The screen switched inputs instantly. My presentation appeared. The first slide was simple, a screenshot of the brewery reservation confirmation. Date and time clearly visible. I turned back toward the room. "I booked this space a few weeks ago," I said, my voice steady, "because I believed tonight would mark the start of something permanent." The second slide appeared, the same reservation email. But this time the activity log was visible, opened earlier that week, from my laptop, while I had been at work. A few people shifted in their seats. Caleb leaned forward slightly now, his smile tightening. "What's this?" he said lightly. I didn't answer the question. I moved to the next slide. A screenshot of a text message from Caleb to Aaron. "You better not miss this. It's going to be hilarious." The room went quiet. Not dramatically, just gradually, like someone lowering the volume on a crowded space until only breathing remained. I read the message exactly as written. No commentary. No extra emotion. Just the words. Aaron shifted in his chair and stared down into his drink. Caleb's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous," he said with a quick laugh. "Olivia, what are you doing?" I clicked the next slide. An audio icon appeared on the screen. I pressed play. Caleb's voice filled the room through the TV speakers. Clear, casual. Imagine someone proposing in front of everyone, and the other person just says no, that would be brutal, but kind of amazing. The recording ended. Heavy silence followed. Caleb stood up abruptly. Okay, that's enough, he said sharply. He looked around the room, forcing a laugh that sounded thinner than before. She's being dramatic. This is a joke. I let him speak. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. Long enough for the words to hang in the air. Then I said the sentence I had practiced in my head all week. You told Sophie you wanted to watch me say no and make her cry. The room froze. For the first time that night, Caleb didn't look excited. He looked trapped. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Caleb laughed again, louder this time, the way people do when they think volume can restore control to a situation that's slipping away. Seriously, he said, looking around the room. This is what this is about? He gestured vaguely toward the TV screen. She's taking jokes and turning them into some conspiracy. His tone carried that familiar sharp confidence he used whenever he thought he could overpower a conversation by talking faster than everyone else. Everyone jokes about proposals, he continued. You know how people are online? It's sarcasm. He turned toward the group, trying to recruit the room back onto his side. Right? No one answered. The silence stretched longer than he expected. I didn't interrupt him. I simply stood where I was, calm enough that my heartbeat had slowed to a steady rhythm. When he finished talking, I asked one question. If it was just a joke, I said quietly, why did you insist I keep this exact date? He opened his mouth, closed it, then pivoted. That's not the point, he said quickly. The point is, you went through my phone. I didn't, I replied. That message appeared on your lock screen. Aaron shifted in his seat again, staring hard at the wooden table in front of him. Caleb's eyes flicked toward him for half a second. Then he tried a different angle. And the recording? He said sharply. You recorded me without telling me? I recorded you repeating the exact scenario you had already been laughing about. The words were calm. That seemed to frustrate him more than if I had yelled. He turned back toward the room again, hands spread wide. You see what she's doing? He said. She's twisting things to make me look like some villain. His voice carried the same persuasive tone he used when telling stories at parties. She's insecure about the proposal thing, so she's turning a joke into this whole dramatic performance. For a second, it almost worked. You could feel the room trying to decide where to land. Then Sophie spoke. Her voice was quiet, but in a silent room, it carried clearly. That's not true. Every head turned toward her. Sophie sat at the edge of the table, both hands wrapped tightly around her glass. You told me it would be funny to watch her get embarrassed, she said. Caleb snapped his head toward her. Sophie, don't start. You did, she said, more firmly now. You said it would be iconic. The word hung in the air again. A couple of Caleb's friends exchanged uncomfortable looks. Someone slowly lowered their phone. Caleb's composure cracked just a little. Oh, come on, he said, pointing at Sophie. Now you're betraying me too? I'm not betraying you, she said. I'm telling the truth. That moment told me everything I needed to know. Not once during this entire conversation had Caleb said he was sorry. Not once had he acknowledged that planning to humiliate someone publicly might be wrong. His focus was still exactly where it had always been. Control. Control of the narrative. Control of how the room saw him. I stepped forward slightly so everyone could hear me clearly. I planned tonight because I believed we were building something stable, I said. My voice remained steady. I'm not perfect, but I don't treat serious commitments as entertainment. Caleb rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh my God. If you had doubts about marriage, I continued, we could have talked about them privately, like adults. A few people nodded slightly. Caleb crossed his arms. You're overreacting. What I overheard wasn't doubt, I said. It was a plan to turn my vulnerability into a spectacle. The room was silent again. The kind of silence that arrives when people realize they're watching the end of something. I won't propose to someone who sees my trust as an opportunity for an audience, I said. The words landed quietly. But they landed. Caleb's expression shifted. The confidence he had carried all evening drained away in increments, replaced by something sharper. Panic. Because the story he expected wasn't happening. There was no moment where he laughed and rejected me. No public humiliation for him to perform. Instead, he was standing in front of a room full of people who now understood exactly what he had planned. He tried one last angle. You're humiliating me right now, he said. His voice had lost most of its swagger. You could have handled this privately, I answered calmly. The original plan involved me on one knee in front of this same audience. No one disagreed. Aaron finally spoke, surprising everyone. I didn't think it was that serious, he muttered. I thought he was exaggerating. I didn't respond to him. He wasn't the core issue. Caleb's eyes were glassy now, not fully crying yet, but close. You set me up, he said quietly. You found something and weaponized it. I corrected him once. I didn't search for something to hurt you, I said. I confirmed something you were already proud enough to tell other people. That sentence landed harder than anything else I had said. A couple of Caleb's friends began gathering their things quietly, not storming out, just shifting away from the tension. The room no longer felt like a party. It felt like accountability. I walked back to the center of the room and closed my laptop. The screen went dark. "There won't be a proposal tonight," I said clearly, "and there won't be a relationship after tonight. No yelling. No insults. Just logistics. I'll expect my apartment key returned tomorrow," I continued, "and we can arrange a time for you to collect anything you left at my place." That was the moment Caleb's composure finally broke. His eyes filled. The tears came fast, the way they do when someone realizes control is completely gone. "You're really throwing away 2 years over a joke?" he said. I met his eyes. "I'm ending it over intentional disrespect," I replied. Then I stepped away from the center of the room. The evening dissolved on its own after that. No dramatic ending. No applause. Just people quietly realizing they had witnessed the collapse of something that had looked stable only minutes earlier. And the strange part was, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just certain. I didn't stay at the brewery much longer after that. Once the words were said, there was nothing left to negotiate. A few people came over quietly before I left. Not to take sides, not to interrogate what had happened, just to say they were sorry the night had unfolded that way. I appreciated the intention, but I didn't need a crowd processing the moment with me. I thanked the brewery manager, settled the bill for the room, and stepped outside. The air along the river was cool and calm, the kind of quiet that only exists after a crowded room empties behind you. Two of my friends followed me into the parking lot. "You okay?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I said. And strangely enough, I meant it. Not happy, not relieved, just steady, like a decision had finally closed a door that had been hanging half open for months. On the drive home, my phone buzzed 3 times. "Caleb." I didn't answer. A few minutes later, a text appeared. "We need to talk." I replied once. "Tomorrow afternoon. Public place. We can exchange keys and personal items." Structured. Clear. No room for emotional improvisation. When I got home, the apartment felt different immediately. Not empty. Just quiet in a way it hadn't been in a long time. I walked through the living room and started gathering the things that obviously belonged to him. A couple of hoodies. 2 pairs of gym shoes. A shaving kit he kept in my bathroom. Some books stacked near the couch. Nothing dramatic. Just small objects that had slowly migrated into my space over 2 years. I placed everything neatly into 2 boxes and set them by the front door. Then I did something practical. I changed my laptop password, removed his access from my streaming accounts, logged out of the shared grocery app we use sometimes. Not revenge, just cleanup. About an hour later, there was a knock on my door. Not aggressive, just persistent. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, Caleb was standing in the hallway. He looked different, his hair slightly messy, his eyes red, and his face still blotchy from crying earlier. The confident energy he usually carried was gone. "You blindsided me," he said. His voice was shaky. "I stepped halfway into the hallway so he wouldn't walk into the apartment. I overheard you planning to humiliate me days ago," I said calmly. "That's not a blindside, that's a reaction." He ran a hand through his hair. "I panicked," he said quickly. "Okay, I felt pressured about the marriage thing." That was the first statement he had made all night that sounded remotely honest. I nodded once. "Fear is normal," I said. "Public humiliation isn't." He looked down at the floor for a second, then back up at me. "What if we just cancel the proposal idea?" he said. "We can keep dating. No pressure." That was the moment everything became perfectly clear. Not the brewery, not the slideshow, not the argument. This moment. Because if someone can casually downgrade something serious without addressing the disrespect that led there, then the relationship itself was never built on the same foundation. "I need a partner who protects me in rooms I'm not in," I said quietly. "Not someone who turns me into content." His eyes filled again. This time the tears came slower, quieter. I picked up the 2 boxes and placed them in front of him. "Your things," I said. He hesitated for a second before reaching into his pocket. The key to my apartment sat in his hand. For a brief moment, he looked like he might argue again. Instead, he placed it in my palm. That was the last time he stood in my hallway as my boyfriend. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin stripes across the floor. For a few seconds, I expected the heavy feeling that usually comes after a breakup. It never arrived. Instead, I felt something else. The future I had imagined with Caleb depended on mutual respect. Once that foundation disappeared, there wasn't much left to mourn. At 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from him. Long paragraphs. Apologies. Then another message. Anger. Accusations that I had ruined his reputation. I read both messages once. I didn't respond. At 9, he called. I let it go to voicemail. The first voicemail sounded tearful. The second sounded irritated. The shift was almost mechanical. like someone testing different strategies to see which one would get a reaction. By noon, I made a decision I probably should have made months earlier. I blocked his number, Instagram, Facebook, every platform where he could contact me directly. Not dramatic, just a boundary. Before blocking his email too, I sent one final message. Short, clear. I don't wish you harm. I don't wish you humiliation. But I will not stay connected to someone who planned to publicly degrade me. After that, the silence began. And the silence felt stable, not lonely, just peaceful. A few mutual friends reached out during the following weeks. Most of them hadn't known what Caleb had planned. They told me they were uncomfortable the moment everything unfolded. They respected the way I handled it. I listened, but I didn't chase validation. The people who were in that room saw the truth. That was enough. Apparently, Caleb started telling a different version of the story. In his version, everything was sarcasm, and I had overreacted to hurt him. That didn't surprise me. I didn't bother correcting every retelling. Truth has a way of settling where it needs to settle. 3 weeks later, my routine looked almost exactly like it had before. Work during the day, gym in the evening, groceries on Sunday. But something inside my apartment had changed. The space felt like mine again. No tension, no quiet competitions over nothing. Just calm. Looking back, the biggest realization wasn't about the brewery night itself. It was about the smaller signs I ignored along the way. The teasing that always went a little too far. The jokes about me in front of other people. The way Caleb would push boundaries and then call me sensitive if I reacted. Each moment felt minor on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I didn't fully examine until it crossed a line too obvious to ignore. Hearing him describe my vulnerability as entertainment forced that clarity. Once I understood that, the decision became simple. I was ready to get on one knee that night. Instead, I stood up for myself.